When I was 12,
magician.
When I was 12, I was fascinated by some mysterious medallions that I found in a New Age shop in Beer-Sheva's old city. These medallions, said the seller, were invented by King Solomon himself, and they have the power to create miracles. I thought that it is very strange that a verse from the New Testament was written on one of the medallions, so I made a little research. I found out that the origin of those medallions is a famous text known under the title The Key of Solomon, or in the Latin, Clavicula Solomonis. It was so famous that almost anyone who had any interaction with magic mentioned it. Eliphaz Levi, the famous French occultist, admired the key and even had his own version of it combined with his tarot cards, and he regarded the tarot as a complement of the key. Madame Blavatsky hated the key, which according to her was the height of superstition and ignorance. Samuel Matters, one of the leaders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, translated the key using several manuscripts. The order itself, as noticed by Robert Gilbert, used the symbolism of the key in its own magic system. Even today, there are some groups that practice the key, which is its basic concept is the method to control and summon demons, a method that attributed to King Solomon. While the relation between magic and sex in Théon's circles have been discussed in some works, such as the Venus work on Pascal Beverly, Randolph, and Urban's book on Magia Sexualis, I would like to show how the cosmic movement and its precursor, the HBOFL, contributed to a different system of magic, the Solomonic magic. I will examine some magical aspects in the writing through a wider historical phenomenon that Frank Lassen wrote about in his The Transformations of Magic, which is, in general, the process where magical texts transformed in format and content so they would adapt to the doctrine of their owners. The theoretical and practical knowledge that the Key of Solomon suggests in many languages diffused among many circles, and although it influenced them, I would like to see how they influenced it, or how those circles interpreted the key and sometimes created their own version, harmonized with their interpretation. The HBOFL, or the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, presented itself as order of practical occultism, whose grand master of the exterior circle was Max Théon. Their practice, often identified as magic, is one of the main issues discussed in the work of Godwin, Chanel, and Devaney about this interesting order. In this presentation, I rely on the book which made available important works of the HBOFL. The importance of practice also appears in the second group headed by Théon, the Cosmic Movement. In their seventh epoch, a work focused on the mythology, which is available to me in probably the English original version, thanks to Boaz.
Thanks to Ella.
Thanks to Ella. Thanks to Ella himself, yeah. There is a story about the firstborn child of a rich and wise king. And I quote, "When the child was 8 days old, the king made a magnificent feast. Then 3 chiefs offered him gifts. The first offered him an ancient and rare amulet, the second offered him a golden box of rare gems, the third offered him a ring. The child stretched forth his hand and grasped the brilliance of the ring. The great hall rang with applause, and the chiefs were full of admiration, saying, 'Already the child knows how to choose that which is the most valuable, to choose the practical before the ideal, for the amulet is of legendary value only.'" Leaving apart the Jewish and Christian allusions to the Brit Milah, the Jewish circumcision ceremony, and the 3 Magi of the New Testament, it is clear from this passage that practice should be preferred over other aspects. The amulet, the golden box of gems, and the ring are all objects with certain virtue, but the amulet, the one that's strongly associated with magic in those days, is of legendary value only. This attitude toward objects that are considered as magical instruments is not unique in Théon's circle, as we will see. Before going on to some of the works of the HBOFL, let me start with a brief introduction to basic concepts of Solomonic magic, whose famous work from the 15th century is the Key of Solomon. Many practical texts bearing the name of famous figures sometimes reflect an image that a scribe holds in his mind. For the Solomonic magic, the image of King Solomon, a wise king that ruled over the demons, is an ancient one and is related to the nature of the king's knowledge. In one of the manuscripts of the Key of Solomon, we get a visual sketch of this image, combined with elements of Solomonic magic. The magician as a king, standing in the center of the circle, with a crown on his head and a wand in his hand, surrounded by all his tools, his book, his knife, his sword, his censer, and, hard not to notice, his medallion, lemon or pentacle, that's supposed to bind the demon that's summoned outside the circle, engraved on specific metal or written on a piece of parchment, a virgin parchment. Each instrument had been consecrated with a special adjuration, including holy and angelic names. This practice has changed over the decades, especially through two different processes. The first is the process of borrowing selected elements from it, and the second is the process of placing it in a different theoretical framework. An example for the first will be the medallions, which you can see here, that's supposed to bind the demons, but circulated as amulets since the 16th century, without any connection with the origin. An example for the second process will be the perception of the famous magician Aleister Crowley, who argued that the demons of the key are parts in the human brains, which the magician just stimulate through his ceremony. This psychological approach became connected with spiritual notions, and the contemporary magicians like Carol Runyon argued that this practice is a quote, Western tradition of psycho-spiritual development, and named the practitioner as a spiritual explorer. Where these two processes, that is to say, the process of borrowing directly or indirectly, and the process of reframing the Solomonic magic, took a part in the works of the Théon circles, to answer this question, I will examine works of the HBOFL and works of the Cosmic Movement. The first work will be The Light of Egypt by Thomas Bourgoin, or Dalton, which is first edition published in 1889 and an expanded edition published in 1900. This work, as Patrick Bowen phrased it, is the first major original, I quote here, is the first major original work produced by the HBOFL, and it demonstrated only minimal interest in occult teaching on sex. End quote. In the second volume of The Light of Egypt, there are 3 chapters that contains references, not always explicit, to Solomonic magic, with a linguistic approach in which he discusses the real sense of words through etymological analysis. Bourgoin explains the words talisman, ceremony, and magic, while referring to the current usage of them. The word talisman in his days, says Bourgoin, means a piece of imposture connected with some magical hocus-pocus of the ignorant and superstitious mind. In contrast to talisman, charms can be effective. And I quote, if the magical artist be expert and endowed with exceedingly potent will, his charm may become very powerful. But if this one grand essential be lacking, no amount of Kabbalistical figures and sacred names will have any effect, because there can be no potency in symbols apart from the ideas and mental force they are capable of arousing in the minds of the makers. Solomon's seal is no more powerful when drawn upon virgin parchment with a weak will, or in a mechanical state of mind than a child's innocent scribbling upon slate. Will is a very important element for the HBOFL members, as it's for many other esotericists. It is the will that's spinning the magical wheels, and while discussing on ceremonial magic, which he prefers, Bourgoin prefers, to call ritual magic, he explains that, quote, will and motive form the basis of true magic. The idea that the efficacy of magical operation depends exclusively on immanent components of the magician's nature, like will or the ability to understand symbols, suggests that any outer component is unnecessary. This is what stands behind Beer-Sheva attitude toward the magical instruments. Quote, what then is the use of magical rites of symbols and price rewards? We answer, in themselves alone, nothing, absolutely nothing, except the facility and convenience we derive from system, order, and the code of procedure. To this may be added the mental force and the enthusiasm of soul which such things inspire. The instruments and preparations of magical operation, which we later see that Beer-Sheva referred to Solomonic one, are just tools to raise enthusiasm. To this rule, however, there are some exceptions. Quote, magic swords, rings, pentacles, and wands may and often are powerful magical agents in the hands of the magician by virtue of the power or charm that is invested within them when properly prepared. But apart from such preparation, by those who know, they are as powerless as the unintelligible incantations. By preparation, Beer-Sheva must probably mean the process of magnetizing those tools, so they will have some magnetic and therefore magical properties. The focus on inner forces creates flexible magic system in which personalization is legitimate. An application of that can be found long before Beer-Sheva in Levi's version of the key, where he instructs the practitioner to consecrate and magnetize the pentacles and add a biblical verse of their own choice, which best express to them the virtue of letters and numbers. This is why some of Levi's pentacle appears with verse, see it, while other are not. There are no verse in the other. Like Beer-Sheva, those talismans, according to Levi, and I quote, fix the mind, render the thought stronger, and serve as sacraments to the will. But in contrast with Beer-Sheva, Levi claimed that they do have an immanent power, and the magician should have a great lucidity of mind and a great purity of heart when he makes them, so they won't be used by evil entities that would make him, quote, the first victim. In a fascinating and very clear passage, Beer-Sheva applies his view on Solomonic magic, and I quote here, you may enter your magic circle, drawn with prescribed rites, and you may intone your consecrations and enchant your incantations. You may burn your incense in the brazen censer and pose in your flowing priestly robes. You may bear the sacred pentacles of the Spirit upon your breast and wave the magic sword, and yell your conjurations and exorcisms till you are black in the face. But all in vain, my friend, all in vain. Not the priestly robes nor magic sword can produce nature response to occult rites. But the fire of the inward spirit, the mental realization of each word and mystic sign, combined with the conscious knowledge of your own deific powers, this and this only create nature's true magician. End quote. Beer-Sheva is aware of the process in which text might go through reframing, and he actually gives the Key of Solomon as an example of that process, and claims that the key became the tarot of Bohemian gypsies. He is most probably alluding to the mishmash of the key with tarot in the works of Eliphaz Levi and Papu's Tarotech. Beer-Sheva's approach to Solomonic magic might explain another work of the HBOFL, which is the second part of the Laws of Magic Mirrors, which Godwin, Chanel, and Devaney considers as a work of Peter Davidson, the president of the eastern section of the HBOFL. This part, entitled The Rite of Consecration of Crystals and of Mirrors, contains a ceremony of Solomonic magic tradition. In this ritual, the magician activates his crystal or mirror, so an angel will appear and answer his question. As Godwin, Chanel, and Devaney mentioned, this is probably a duplication of work by Francis Barrett, or more accurate, Barrett's translation of The Art of Drawing Spirits into Crystals, that attributed to Johannes Trithemius. This work relies heavily on Solomonic magic operations that got a Christianized form and instead of demons, the magician summons angels by the name of the Christ. It contains much of the tools that serve the usual Solomonic magician, including the circle, pentacle, censer, wand, and the ring. In Davidson's version, there is no explicit Christian reference, and some tools are missing. No circles, but a special room, no ring, and no wand. Only the appearance of the pentacle discloses the Solomonic tradition behind this operation, which might reflect the flexibility of such operation in the eyes of an HBOFL member. Some elements of this ritual appears in the initiation rites, both the private and the exterior. In both cases, the practitioner asked to recite 4 evocations from Levi's work on the conjurations of the 4 elementary spirits, which is the creatures that represent the 4 elements, namely the watery undines, the fiery salamanders, the aerial sylphs, and the earthly gnomes. In order to become the king of the occult elements, argued Levi, the word of our will must be imposed on the elements by special consecration of air, fire, water, and earth. The special consecrations of those elements are formulas that Levi borrowed from the Key of Solomon and blend them with Kabbalistic terms to make them more suitable to his notion of the relation between magic and Kabbalah. But while the consecration formulas in the Key are full of nomina barbara, Levi's formula are modest. Mention few famous phrases like tetragrammaton, alpha et omega, some Kabbalistic terms, namely the Sephirot, the name of the Sephirot, and some angelic names. Nothing from the consecration formulas has been mentioned in the HBOFL initiation rites. The rite of the exterior initiation, for example, mentioned that we exercise the air by blowing through the 4 cardinal points, but while Levi wrote here the consecration formula, the HBOFL members omit it. This omission is not a one-time event, and it is far from being a coincidence, especially when Ben-Gurion, in the rite of the private initiation, instruct the student to use the elemental evocation from Levi, but, aside, no notice is to be taken of the magical formula. Recite the prayers of the sylphs, ditto of the undines, ditto of the salamanders, and gnomes. These prayers alone are to be used, not with the consecration formula. In my opinion, these specifications meant to keep the student away from the consecration formulas of Levi. The motive of such editing might be explained through the HBOFL view of Solomonic operations, as Ben-Gurion mentioned in the Light of Egypt, and they might want to enforce this view among the neophytes that probably were aware of the Key and its elaborated formulas. To conclude this, it seems that some operations of the Key were interpreted, and through this interpretation, which is the importance of the will and the mind, and the real psychological role of the instruments, a selective borrowing of some parts of the Key were made. Consecration process through adjurations was abandoned for a magnetizing process with a universal-like prayer addressing God without naming or using any known or unknown nomina barbara. Now to the cosmic movement. Some works of the Théons imply that they were familiar with Solomonic magic tradition. The art of invocation or evocation, they use these words interchangeably, was for the Théons a tool which one can use to fight against evil, sometimes referred to as inimical enemy or adversary. According to them, I quote here, the knowledge of the immense power which would be ours could be contend successfully against the inimical as inducement from all ages to attempt the invocation by word or action of the inimical, and many are the records of those who have compelled these beings to serve or, on their refusal, undone them. Nevertheless, man has gained no advantage from these frequently recorded victories over the lesser beings of the inimical. A significant victory that they mention in their work is the victory over Asmodeus, or Ashmedai, achieved by one named Nephli. After this combat, the Théons explain that only born invokers who are duly evolved and educated are allowed to dare the inimical. Then they classify 4 different types of evokers or invokers. The most rare one, the contemplative invokers, the active invokers, and the evokers of those who have left the body. The first group are those who have, and I quote, most valuable property of non-exteriorizing. By no possibility can those whom they evoke cause them to exteriorize. These evokers are self-protected. What they require in order to combat effectually is also rare, and that is a sensitive within such affinity with them, into whatever state they pass, they are enveloped in this aura of protection. This form of evocation is almost unknown now. No specific practice is mentioned in the description of these rare invokers, and the same can be said on the contemplative invokers, the invokers that are less protected, and they need a protector, a sensitive, that will always be in call, because, quote, the enemy may draw the contemplative to the state or degree of being where he, the enemy, is the most powerful, and where therefore he has the best means of overcoming him. The fourth type, the evokers of those who have left the body, considered as strictly forbidden because of its dangerous nature. But the third type, the active invokers, is the one I want to focus on. Those who the Théons named active invokers are actually invokers of Solomonic tradition, I quote here. These invokers prepare for the conflict by many elaborate and difficult ceremonies and customs, such as ablutions, abstinence, changing of apparel, the burning of certain known substances which are said to attract or drive away the inimical, the calling of names, the repetition of certain known formulas, the burning of circles of lamps and of incense, etc. Although they saw the active Solomonic invocation method as lawful, the Théons tried to avoid it and keep any reader of their work away from use it by various warnings. First, they claimed that this practice is uncertain and ineffectual. Then they argued that every defeat of an invoker is a danger and enfeeblement for all other invokers. They also attribute to this practice physical and mental illnesses that are contagious, and said that a special order of the inimical devote themselves to the answering to active evocation. But the most striking idea of the Théon is about the preparation of the active invocations. And I quote, apart from this inconvenience and harmfulness, the preparatory practices, such as many ablutions and abstinence, enfeeble not only the exterior envelope, but the nervous, psycho, and mental disease of the physical nervous state. This is a unique approach, which, although legitimate this practice, ascribes danger to almost every aspect of it. There is only one way that this practice can be used according to the Théons, and it is the hierarchical order. It should be attempted only in hierarchical order, that is, the evoker should be surrounded by living circles of his fellow men and preceded by his forerunners and avant-garde, whose office it is to meet and combat with the forerunners and avant-garde of the one invoked. Those ideas are not disconnected from reality. The Théons mentioned that this type of invokers is, I quote, by far the most numerous, and that the ceremonies and practice of this type, I quote here, unfortunately fell into vulgar hands, and its signification being veiled, it was ill-interpreted. This critical connotation of this stance seems directed towards some practitioners that the Théons couple knew or heard about, who practiced Solomonic magic. It is very clear from their classification that the safest and most effective invocation are those of the first type. In the Chronicles of Chi, they mention this type once again. I quote, children of the evoked are set apart as mighty wrestlers in this physical nervous degree of being. That is, they are of the most rare of all orders of wrestlers, who are able to evoke and contend with nervous beings inimical without exteriorizing, which is the most powerful of all ways of wrestling and the freest from danger also. This quotation clarifies the meaning of the invocation in the Théon's works and raises a simple equation: invocation equal wrestling with the inimical. It seems that the Théons took the psychological framework of Ben-Gurion one step further and incorporate the concept of invocation in the doctrine, refer to it as a spiritual tool that should be used in order to wrestle evil beings that are responsible for the disequilibrium of the universe. I believe that Solomonic magic, directly or indirectly, inspired the Théons, who treated it as a dangerous method and developed a unique and unknown notion of invocation incorporated in their doctrine about the forces of the universe. The original idea of controlling the demons in the Key of Solomon became the wrestling with the inimical, and in both cases, it is done through evocation. The HB of L and the cosmic movement mentioned in the work the Solomonic magic tradition, either by name or by general description. The members of both groups saw themselves as elite, who revealed the true meaning of the magical operation by reframing it into a psychological or cosmic frame. They argued against popular understanding of Solomonic magical traditions and recommended against such practices. Still, they borrowed elements from the famous Key of Solomon and incorporated them into their own system of magic and mythology. These steps, taken earlier by Eliphaz Levi, helped to create an environmental change that encouraged new approaches to old practices. In the 19th and 20th century, it is common to find explanation concerning the mechanisms and theoretical basis of Solomonic magic. Some of these explanations, like Levi's and Pappus, emphasize the combination of the physical and the metaphysical. You can see here in the picture from Pappus' elementary treatise of practical magic. This, in the left, you can see the physical plane with the circle and all the tools, and while the right side, you can see the astral plane, in which you can see the demons and the manifestation of three holy names. You can't see, but they're written Tetragrammaton there, and Agla and Adonai. Some, like Ben-Gurion, stress the metaphysical and treat the physical aspect of Solomonic magic as a mental trick. The Théons, as we saw, not only emphasize the metaphysical aspect, but also warn the practitioners from the physical one. Therefore, it is reasonable to argue that the works of the APOFL and the cosmic movement serve as a milestone in the transformation of Solomonic magic from medieval demonic and almost mathematical method to contemporary psychological and flexible practice. Thank you.